Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Operation Gladio meets Secret Society with WarHamster Brady. How are you today?
I am doing wonderful. Thanks for asking.
Where are we going today?
Well, this is going to be a fun one. I think the title of this show could be War Pigs, Warmongers, the Neocons, the Neolibs, and they're all revolved around a theme that we've talked about over and over and over again. Top level is our foreign intelligence, our foreign policy, whether it be intelligence, diplomacy, trade, what have you, espionage. It's all orchestrated for the benefit of our multinational corporations. And they use a lot of the Ivy League schools where they recruit for the CIA, the State Department. The same people, they go to the same private boarding schools, go to the same Ivy League schools, they join the same secret society like Skull and Bones. They find themselves in all these positions of power to actually influence our foreign policy. Today, we're going to hit on a bonesman and his family, a guy by the name of Robert Kagan, Skull and Bones class of 1980. And you're going to know these names off the top of your head. First, we're going to talk about his whole family. I'll go through them one by one because the whole family are a bunch of neocons, neolibs, war pigs. And the first one we're going to show you is Robert Kagan himself with his lovely wife, Victoria Nuland, the mistress of death, architect of the Ukraine fiasco. Good looking.
I think that picture right there with War Pigs is the name of the show.
It might have to be. I get a little War Pigs music in the background. All right, so Robert Kagan, it's the whole family, though, is involved in all this stuff. This is his father, Donald Kagan. Oops. And you can see him speaking the National Endowment for the Humanities. We'll talk a little bit more about Donald, but he is the senior patron of this lovely family. Then, of course, we've got his brother, Frederick Kagan. He's a military historian and neocon in his own right. There's Frederick speaking at the AEI, that's the American Enterprise Institute, and we'll be talking about them a little bit. It's another one of these NGOs and think tanks. And our last one, of course, just to make it fair, we've got to talk about his wife, who is Kimberly Kagan. And she's also a military historian who founded this thing called the ISW she's speaking at, and that's the International Studies for War. So one big happy family of war pigs. Got it?
Got it.
All right. So let's jump into the Kagan family. All right, Robert Kagan, Yale class of 1980, Skull and Bones. Known as a columnist in the Ultimate Neocon. He's been a critic of U.S. foreign policy, and he's a leading advocate, in his own words, for what he calls liberal internationalism. Okay, so we'll get more to him in a second here, but let's talk about his dad. And where do I have that?
Donald Kagan.
Yep. Okay. Donald is born in Athens, Greece. He's a Lithuanian Jew. That's one of the interesting things. These last couple bones moved in, we'd had a couple Jewish guys. Now that would not have been the case 2 decades before because they were purely Puritan or Protestant, but that started to change in the late 70s and 80s. Bear with me 1 second. Where do I have Donald hiding?
Well, it also says that his family was originally from Lithuania.
Yeah, they're Lithuanian Jews.
Yeah.
Okay, so Donald Kagan's born in 1932 in Lithuania. Came here when he was 2 years old, grew up in Brooklyn, went to Brooklyn College, and got a master's in the classics from Brown University. Got his PhD in history from Ohio State. In 1969, in his own words, his political views shifted from liberal towards neoconservatism. And the reason that happened is there was a bunch of student protests in 1969, the Summer of Love at Cornell University, where he was teaching. And he did not think the university's response was, he thought the response was inadequate. He wanted them to be a lot more forceful on the students. So a neocon is born.
Silencing free speech.
Yes. He's really known for his research on the Peloponnesian War. He's a Greek scholar. That's where he really got his known, really made his name in academia. With his son Frederick, they wrote a book or a paper called "While America Sleeps," which advocated for, tell me if this is familiar, increased defense spending.
It's what all war pigs do.
Yeah. And of course, they do this on behalf of the military-industrial complex, who usually do most of the funding of these think tanks.
Correct. And
Okay.
where did he spend most of his academic career? The dad, Donald.
Yale, 25 years. Yeah, he was a Sterling Professor of Classics and History at Yale, retired in 2013. His course that he taught, called The Origins of War, was one of the most popular courses at Yale. He got involved. Go ahead.
I'm sure he mentioned that all those wars were for the industrial complex.
Yeah, may have left that out.
Okay.
Okay. Have you heard of the PNAC?
Yes.
That is, what does that abbreviation stand for? I just had it here a second ago. Oh, yeah, the Project for the New American Century.
Yeah.
Donald and son Frederick are two of the original signatories of the PNAC, which was founded by Robert. So all in the family on the PNAC. And we're going to be talking about PNAC a little bit more.
Okay.
But we'll get to that in a second. His brother Frederick Kagan, born in 1970, co-authored While America Sleeps, Self-Delusion, Military Weakness, and the Threat to Peace Today. That was in the year 2000. And Frederick's out there warning in 2000 about Iraq's weapons of mass destruction. This is the origin for the false cause of the entire Iraq war, was Frederick Kagan.
And Frederick Kagan, did he have any military experience?
I think he's just a military historian. I don't think he served.
Yeah. No, he did not.
Yeah. He was a professor from military history at West Point, but I do not think he was ever enlisted.
Which is very interesting, because those of us in the military know that there's a cadre that was birthed at West Point to include Pompeo that have a completely warped vision of war history taught by people who have never fought in any war.
Amazing how that works.
Yeah.
War pigs is the right name.
And if I'm not mistaken, Frederick Kagan's expertise, as he touted it, was Russia.
We'll get to that.
Okay. Yeah. Because that bears understanding that as you go through this, because of what we're experiencing today.
Okay, so he becomes a resident scholar at the American Enterprise Institute, AEI, which is considered officially a center-right think tank. Founded in 1938, it advocates for private enterprise, limited government, and what they call democratic capitalism. I think they've kind of fallen off that mission. Some of the recent members: John Bolton, Dinesh D'Souza, Dick Cheney, his wife Len Cheney, Newt Gingrich. And I just wanted to pull up the AEI real quick.
Okay.
I just wanted to thanks to you that this is actually worth what a website to have on everybody's share list, because they put out a lot of interesting articles about some pretty important topics, and they are shaping the way the establishment thinks. So they are worth listening to. When you go to their homepage here, first thing article they have posted is the power to tax foundations is the power to destroy them. And since we've been talking a lot about foundations, I just thought I'd mention this. Tacked away in tax legislation making its way through Congress is an obscure provision that could lead to profound changes in civil society, and not for the better. The House Republicans' bill would sharply increase excise taxes paid by the foundations that would help underwrite America's charitable sector. The Senate should reconsider the proposal. So here's what they're talking about. The Tax Reform Act of 1969 established the current rules for private foundations. It affirms their right to exist in perpetuity while requiring them to grant out a fixed percentage of their endowments each year to support charitable activities. Initially 6%, reduced in 1976 to 5%. The act also beefed up transparency standards and set a flat excise tax on the investment income foundations earn through their endowments. The tax rate has long remained in the low single digits, and it's currently at 1.39%. So just to put that into perspective, the first tax-free foundations were by Carnegie and Rockefeller after Teddy Roosevelt had theoretically broken up the trusts. So they hid all their generational wealth in these tax-free foundations, which they can draw almost tax-free salaries from. All the investment growth inside there gets taxed at 1.39%, and these are the exact same people that gave the income tax to the rest of us in 1913. And that's how they have more money than God, and that's how they they're what they call charitable investments. A lot of it's giving to the endowments at schools like the Ivy League colleges, Harvard, Yale, etc. And that's how they groom the next generation of leaders. And that's why they put their people in all the key positions. And this is exactly how the foundations run the world. And they get taxed at 1.39%. While the rest of us are paid 35%. Think about that.
Correct.
AEI's got a lot of great stuff. I mean, their research is really good. I was looking up to see where they got their financing just a bit ago. And let's see what the AI came up with.
And just let me say, since we're talking about it, it was pointed out in an article written by Gary Smith that the CIA under Brennan had reorganized to make more use of products coming out of organizations like the American Enterprise Institute. They basically elevated their information in the stream of intelligence. They made a better use of it. So you basically have the foundations funding and crafting intelligence products as a part of a reorganization that Brennan did. And that article was written in 2015.
Yeah, you look at some of the headlines. I mean, they're talking about everything geopolitical there is. And like I said, this is where a lot of the establishment gets their ideas from. So AEI is no joke. And here we have Frederick Kagan writing. Okay.
And
Frederick,
just to make that point, there's a guy by the name of Kenneth Pollock who was CIA, who becomes the resident expert at American Enterprise Institute, and he served for a very long time on the National Security Council, which we know is the one that directs the operational aspect of Gladio. So they're infiltrated into all of these organizations, just to make that point.
Very, very much so. And of course, I just have to point out that, of course, AEI gets most of its funding from foundations. And now they're writing a paper advocating to keep the taxes low on foundations.
Correct.
And they're only doubling it to 2.5%. So it's not like a major tax, but they're going to fight it tooth and nails. And watch which senators come out and oppose this what is it? A Big Beautiful Bill.
Yeah.
All right. What else has Frederick done? Okay. He authors what's called the Real Iraq Study Group. He did this report for AEI. And the name of the paper was Choosing Victory, a Plan for Success in Iraq. Remember 2007, the surge?
Mm-hmm.
That's Kagan was the guy advocating for that.
And that's Frederick?
Yes.
Yeah.
He another one of the quotes is, "We're not the Soviets in Afghanistan." And that quote influenced Secretary of Defense Robert Gates, and we got 30,000 additional troops sent to Afghanistan. He then gets hired by Army General David Petraeus, who would become the head of the CIA later on. They're allegedly to fight corruption in Afghanistan. He had all kinds of access. A 2012 Washington Post article discussed the relationship with the Kagans had with Petraeus. The article says the Kagans had access to Combined Joint Intelligence Operations Center and Petraeus' HQ. These are civilians. And it raised. Go ahead.
Where did Petraeus go to school?
I didn't look that up.
West
You got it?
Point. West Point.
There you go. One small family. All right. That article also raised questions about AEI's sponsorship by defense contractors. It's the Washington Post reporting on this pretty openly. So that revolving door was already there. And he is a regular contributor to something called the Institute for the Study of War. Institute for the Study of War was founded by his wife, Kimberly Kagan, in 2007. Let's just take a look at what the Institute of War is all about.
And while you're doing that, I just want to mention also Frederick was an advisor to Stanley McChrystal, David Petraeus, and John Allen. And if you know anything about the military, those are kingpins. This is this is the guy advising them.
It's a military historian. All right, let's look at the ISW. Who we are. The Institute of the Study of War advocates for an informed understanding of military affairs through reliable research, trusted analysis, and innovative education. We are committed to improving the nation's ability to execute military operations and respond to emerging threats in order to achieve U.S. strategic objectives. ISW is a nonpartisan, nonprofit public policy research organization. Yeah, you're nonpartisan because you're the establishment. You're the neocons and the neolibs all in one place. And every single foreign policy call these people have made, everyone in his family, they've gotten wrong, which we'll show. Board members are interestingly, you've got General Jack Keane, U.S. Army retired. He's the chairman. You have Dr. Kimberly Kagan, founder and president. Bill Kristol, ultimate anti-Trump neocon. That name will come up again later. You have Kevin Mandia, Jack McCarthy, anyone else? David Petraeus sits on the board. And
so now you know why Fox News General Keane talks about nothing but neocon versions of both history and what is going on today.
Exactly. Let's take a look at some of their research. And this is actually, like I said, there's good stuff here. Oops. Publications. You got a really, there's a really neat search function here. They got the Syria situation, Ukraine crisis updates. Got a really good search here. Most recent stuff, they're talking about Russian force generation and technological adaptations update. This is a lot of good information. If you got the right filter on it and understand who's talking, they do have a lot of resources. So it's a website worth checking out.
And they put out almost daily, quote unquote, updates on the Ukraine-Russia war, which of course they're part of the apparatus that instigated it to begin with.
Absolutely. And we'll get to that more. And a lot of it's the same family. Anyway, that's the ISW. And that's where Kimberly Kagan, that's where she does most of her damage. She's also a military historian. born in 1972 in New York City. She got a BA in classical civilization from Yale, where she met Frederick. She got her PhD in history from Yale and is an Olin postdoctoral fellowship in military history at Yale in 2004 and 5. 2 years later, she would found the Institute for the Study of War. All right. She served on the Joint Campaign Plan Assessment Team for the Multinational Force Iraq U.S. mission in 2008 as an advisor. She's part of a civilian advisory team for CENTCOM Strategic Review in 2009. Kind of a big deal. Served in Kabul as General Stanley McChrystal's Strategic Assessment Team. Keeping it in the family, right? She was Petraeus' assistant, where she got top secret clearance. Let's see. The ISW is described as hawkish. Yeah, they're neocons. They very much supported the 2007 troop surge in Iraq. Different people in the same family whispering in different ears, all for the same neocon outcome. They did a 34-minute documentary. It's called The Surge, The Untold Story. Described a surge strategy in Iraq, and this is a quote, and how some high-ranking U.S. officers claim to have pacified the country and thus won the war. Are you freaking kidding me?
Yeah.
I mean, it's talk about revisionist history. Everything they did in Iraq, they screwed up, and it's still going on to this day, and not a damn person's been pacified. Excuse my language. That's just annoying that they can actually put that out in writing. But someone, Trebeg said in the chat, you mean they created their own echo chamber? Yeah, absolutely. Same people. It's a big old circle jerk is what it is.
And if you look at the funding of the Institute of War, you're going to find that a large chunk of their funding comes from Raytheon, Lockheed, and all of the industrial, military industrial complex.
Very much so.
So you've got the people advocating for war and dead bodies from military people, from these assholes who've never served, and they're advocating for war being funded by the war machine.
War is a racket.
War is a racket. Per Stanley Butler, Smedley Butler.
Yep. I'm just looking up David Petraeus right now. I want to find out who he worked for when he wasn't. You guarantee it's going to be someone like Raytheon. If anybody wants to look that up, find out where McChrystal and Petraeus, what private companies did they work for when they got out?
Well, Petraeus formed his own consulting group. I know that for sure. I had done quite a bit of research on him, but understanding his last area, he was the CENTCOM commander. Obviously that's the war machine. And it says once he retired, let's see. Obviously, he was the CIA director. And let's see. He was a visiting, he's honorary chairman of the OSS Society. I'm sorry. That's hilarious.
Uh-huh.
He worked for, and this is one of the things, and I don't know what to make of this. I'll ask you, Brady. Almost every one of these generals, back in the 70s, 80s, we found all of those general officers on the boards of BCCI and Nugent Hand Bank, and they were all in this money laundering business for the CIA at all of the branches. Almost every one of the branches of Nugent Hand had a military officer in charge of it. And listen to where Petraeus went. He was hired by Kohlberg Kravitz Roberts, New York investment firm.
CCR, I know them.
Hired Petraeus as chairman of the firm's newly created KKR Global Institute.
Perfect.
They have no financial background at all. I mean, other than, you might manage budgets, but it's not the same as being in a corporation where you're actually trying to turn a profit. All they do is spend every penny they get, and they're graded on getting as close to spending everything they get as possible.
Yeah, the other thing about Petraeus was his scandal where he had the affair with Paula Broadwell.
Yeah.
And that became publicized. And then the New York Times reported that both the FBI and the Department of Justice were recommending bringing felony charges against Petraeus for providing classified information to Broadwell.
He also joined Harvard's JFK School of Government. Where do we find all of those people? I mean, that's kind of it. He was also a senior fellow at Balfour Center of Science and International Affairs, which I've come across them several times. He also was a visiting professor at the University of Xavier in England, which kind of takes us back to the root of this bridge between the US, New York specifically, and the city of London.
Absolutely. And the foreign policies overlap directly. It's also interesting that England's Keir Starmer is just ready to massively increase England's defense spending. So that's coming over the next 10 years. That'd be like it's going up like tenfold. All right, a little bit more about the ISW. Just as an example, they've been proponents for military action in the following places. And they got every single one of these wrong, turned them all into third world hellholes. Syrian war, Afghanistan, Iraq war. They did what's called the Middle East Security Project 2011, which was pushing for sanctions on Iran. And of course, in 2011, they released 4 reports urging the overthrow of Gaddafi in Libya, which Hillary would dutifully perform months later. But that's where the idea came from, was the ISW and the lovely Kimberly Kagan. It's a pretty interesting family so far, huh?
Yeah, well, and let me just want to add the capstone for Petraeus before I leave him. He also was being considered for nominations in the first Trump administration. And you know who his biggest backers were? John McCain and Lindsey Graham.
Big shocker. Big shocker there.
Yeah.
Saw something on X yesterday that someone's reporting that Lindsey Graham is someone from the FBI saying Lindsey Graham is getting Ukrainian money straight to his own bank accounts. So I'd like to hear a lot more about that.
Yes.
All right, let's talk about Robert Kagan a little more. We know all about his family. So he gets his BA in history from Yale, becomes Skull and Bones, and he was the editor-in-chief, once again, for the Yale Political Monthly. So he's been writing for a very long time. He got his Master of Public Policy from the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. Didn't you just mention that?
Yes.
Small circles. He gets his PhD in American history from American University in Washington, D.C. So, in 1983, he was the foreign policy advisor to Jack Kemp, former senator. From 84 to 86, he gets a job as the speechwriter for U.S. Secretary of State George Shultz. So he's moving up fast. Those Bonesman connections probably helped, wouldn't you think?
A little bit.
Yeah. 1986 to 88, he works for the State Department's Bureau of Inter-American Affairs. In 1997, with Bill Kristol, that guy again, he co-founds the Project for the New American Century, PNAC. Bill Kristol was the founder and editor of the Weekly Standard, and he's the editor-at-large of The Bulwark. The Bulwark is the most anti-Trump fish wrap going.
I love that fish wrap.
Kristol played a leading role in defeating Hillary's health care plan in 1993. So back when he was a conservative, he actually did some good. Kristol was a huge advocate for the invasion of Iraq. and he sits on boards, I've got that one wrong, of Manhattan Institute for Policy Research, Ethics and Public Policy Center, the Foreign Policy Initiative, and the Keep America Safe Foundation, which was founded by none other than War Pig Liz Cheney. His father, Irving Kristol, was the editor of something called Commentary Magazine and also something called The Public Interest. Jonah Goldberg will call Kristol the godfather of neoconservatism.
Well, and in my research, there are significant ties of the CIA to the Weekly Standard and to his father.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, what more about Kristol? He taught philosophy at Penn and Harvard's Kennedy School of Government.
Seems like that's a kind of a hover spot.
Uh-huh. And isn't that where Jake Sullivan is now teaching? Yeah. So in 1985, he's the chief of staff for the Secretary of Education, William Bennett. Then he becomes chief of staff for Vice President Dan Quayle.
And chief of staff is a gatekeeper, for those of you who don't remember. That is a critically important position in government.
Yeah, very much so. And the New Republic called him Dan Quayle's brain. If people don't remember, Dan Quayle was famous for saying some really stupid things. People questioned his IQ. All right. Kristol in 1998, with Robert Kagan, he wrote a New York Times piece where he said, bombing Iraq isn't enough. This is in 98. They're calling for an invasion of Iraq. They wanted Clinton to invade. Then with Larry Kaplan, he writes, The War Over Iraq, America's Mission and Saddam's Tyranny. These are the papers that were pushing the neocons into this war before 9/11 ever happened.
They're setting the stage. They already knew it was going to happen. They knew 9/11 was going to happen. They are setting the stage.
Yeah. Here's a quote. The only acceptable strategy is one that eliminates the possibility that Iraq will be able to use or threaten to use weapons of mass destruction. They never existed. In the near term, this means a willingness to undertake military action as diplomacy is clearly failing. In the longer term, it means removing Saddam Hussein and his regime from power. That now needs to become the aim of American foreign policy.
And keep in mind, the CIA installed Saddam Hussein through a coup in Iraq.
All right, so here's some other things Kristol got wrong. Oh, he predicted it would be a 2-month-long war. Missed that one by a bit.
He forgot the 0 at the end of the 2. It was 20 years, not 2 months.
Yeah. He's a big advocate for the troop surge, of course. He pushed for the U.S. involvement in the Lebanon War in 2006. How'd that work out? Then he's the foreign policy advisor for John McCain in 2012 and was a main promoter of Sarah Palin, but later recanted. So...
Well, 2008, right? John McCain ran in 2008. And
Mitt
ran in 2012. He was
right.
Yeah, he was a foreign advisor to both of them.
Yeah. He's long pushed for military strikes against Iran. He vehemently opposed the nomination of Trump. He criticized Trump's plan to withdraw troops from Syria and Afghanistan. He's the founder of a group called Republican Voters Against Trump. Fundraised for Nikki Haley, supported Kamala Harris. That's a neocon for you. And I want to hammer that point home. You know, we've talked about this over and over again. Our foreign policy has been run by these same insider groups, these secret societies. It hasn't mattered if there's a Republican or a Democrat president. You know, 3 exceptions to that, of course, were Kennedy, Carter, and Trump.
Correct.
And CIA went after all 3.
Correct.
Predictably. These families, you can see the Kagans, they work for both Republican administrations and they stayed through the Obama years and Biden. They are the foreign policy, not the president.
And that's why they hate Trump, because he doesn't use them and doesn't pay any attention. As a matter of fact, you could formulate foreign policy that would be more beneficial to the United States if you did the opposite of every single thing they said.
Yeah, I mean, every single thing I've listed that he's pushed for, they got wrong.
Well, they didn't get wrong, Brady. I just want to push back a little bit there. They are representing this international syndicate. They got it all right for them because that's who funds them and who they work for. They didn't get it right for us.
One more blurb on Crystal. We'll go back to Kagan. He's got a son, Joseph, who was a Marine. And when he got out, he went to work for a company called McKinsey and Company. Because of course he did. And Bill Kristol's son is now the legislative director for Senator Tom Cotton, who never met a war he didn't want to start either. That's Bill Kristol, who co-founds PNAC in 2007, I believe. 1997. Bill Kristol and Robert Kagan did that. So back to Kagan. Let's talk about PNAC. Founded in 97, advocated for global, direct quote, American global hegemony. Advocated regime change in Iraq. They advocated for military expansion, and they wanted defense spending post 9/11. Of course they did. The original signatories of this PNAC, I don't know, Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, Wolfowitz, all the neocons. By 2005 and 6, it kind of wound down PNAC. It's no longer. Because they said their goals have already either been implemented or discredited. But the same people.
Implemented.
What's that?
Largely implemented.
Yes. The people that worked at that think tank would pretty much make a seamless transition over to the American Enterprise Institute, which we already talked about. So Kagan, in 98, after founding PNAC in 97, from 98 to 2010, he's a senior associate at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, which we've demonstrated week after week is actually the Carnegie Endowment for War.
Correct.
And he's a senior associate there. Writes a book in 2003. It's called Of Paradise and Power, American and Europe in the New World Order. What was his last three words I say? New World Order?
New World Order.
Isn't that sort of the motto of Skull and Bones?
And you have the guy, I think you already mentioned this, but I want to reemphasize it. Dick Cheney, Ronald Rumsfeld, Paul Wolfowitz, Richard Pearl, who wrote he co-wrote the document with Frank Luntz for Israel to sell the Iraq war and its expansion. They basically wrote a propaganda paper together and it was literally how to sell the American people step by step on the fact that we needed to go to Iraq.
Remind me one more time, how many weapons of mass destruction did we find in Iraq?
0.
Oh, jeez. Okay. Kagan, in 2010, gets appointed a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution. So he's at all of these think tanks with all of his terrible ideas. 2006, he writes something called Dangerous Nation, America's Place in the World from its earliest days to the dawn of the 20th century. And what he's doing there, he's arguing that the U.S. has not been isolationist since its inception. And he's dead wrong. Because it's pretty clear that the Founding Fathers wanted an isolationist foreign policy. And the Monroe Doctrine actually existed. So he's arguing the U.S. has always been warmongers. He argues that the U.S. has not been isolationist since its inception. Okay, then he wrote that Russia and China are the greatest challenge liberalism faces today, not Al-Qaeda. In 2008, he writes, Neocon Nation, neoconservative circa 1776, which is about applying U.S. moralism to the world stage and this belief in American hegemony. Tough time of that word today. Okay, 2011. This neocon, right, is one of the first, something is created called the State Department Foreign Affairs Policy Board. Who's the Secretary of State at the time? Hillary Clinton. So neocon is on her advisory board, just to hammer home the point that the neocons and the neolibs are absolutely joined at the hips. They are all war pigs.
Yes.
Who else sat on that 25-member State Department Foreign Affairs Policy Board? Some pretty interesting names. Ones that jumped out at me are Thomas Donnellan, chairman of BlackRock, who we just talked about last week. He's advising on foreign affairs. Think about that. We have David Autor, who's a professor of economics at MIT, academia. Remember, academia has always been involved in our foreign policy.
Yep.
A guy named Hal Brands, who's a professor at Johns Hopkins and a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. There's a Mariano Florentino Cuellar, who's the president of the Carnegie Institute for International Peace / War. How about Kathy Feingold? Remember her?
Yeah.
Director of the AFL-CIO's International Department. Now, why does the AFL-CIO have an international department?
Because the international department is the arm that went into every country to break up legitimate unions, unionizing against American interest in those companies because they were paying slave labor, which is why they offshored all of our jobs. The AFL-CIO would not allow any legitimate unionization against American enterprises, to the point where they would kill people or pay people to kill people that were the leading union representatives, legitimate unions, against things like United Fruit, ITT, Freeport Mine, blah, blah, blah.
Excellent answer. I found that really interesting that Feingold would be on this board.
But you understand, and it bears repeating, the National Endowment for Democracy was set up with a Chamber of Commerce element, a labor element, and the two political parties, the IRI and the DNI, because that's how they did whole war attacking of any country that deemed itself neutral or nationalist. And they used those arms, the political piece, the economic piece, and the economic is chamber and the union, and the military piece of NATO's secret armies, i.e. Gladio, to full-scale attack any country that said they wanted to be a neutralist or a nationalist.
We've got a woman named Margaret Hamburg. She's the commissioner of the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. John Huntsman Jr., former Republican presidential candidate, vice chairman of Ford Motors, and the former ambassador to both China and Russia. So you are connected when you get those two ambassadorships.
You are definitely connected.
Yeah. How about Catherine Maher? Yep. She's been in the news lately as the defender of National Public Radio. She was the CEO of Wikimedia Foundation, and PBS is where she's the head. That's the Catherine Maher. She, in 2011, sat on Hillary Clinton's advisory board, and that's who's running PBS. And why do you think PBS has an absolutely neocon or neoliberal stance on everything? Just go to the source. Yeah, it's right there. You've got Jim Donovan, the managing director of Goldman Sachs, because of course you do. Several executives from Alphabet. Google was very much entrenched in Hillary's State Department. How about the first DNI, John Negroponte?
Oh, gosh.
Yeah. Oh, here's a name you've known before. Thomas Pickering, the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. And I know you've talked about Pickering a number of times.
They have a very long history of intelligence work under the guise of a non-intelligence entity.
Yeah, I'm trying to look real quick to see why Pickering was on our radar earlier.
They're basically, because they operate all over the globe, they are like one of the telecoms or anything else where the CIA embeds itself, and they go back even further than the CIA. I mean, they were one of the original companies, entities that the corporations used as to embed their own intelligence when they paid for it, not obviously after World War II when we pay for it, but they embedded intelligence resources under the guise of doing business.
Yeah, Pickering was on our radar when we talked about Winston Lord, because Winston Lord had gone to Tufts University. They're the ones that had the exchange program with the IDF. And Pickering was one of those Tufts students on that exchange program with IDF. So that's where he came up before.
Yeah.
The Israeli Defense Force.
Yeah.
And you want to know why the war pigs are always backing Israel? No. There you have it.
Again, Israel was the weapons trafficker for all of their illegal weapons into Iran, into South America, into Angola. You have to have a connection to the IDF because historically, the U.S., anytime Congress said you can't do something, they used Israel to traffic the weapons to do it.
Last two names I have on this list of 25 advisors for Hillary is John Podesta. Oh, yeah. And, of course, Strobe Talbot comes up again, Bill Clinton's right-hand man, now currently the president of the Brookings Institute.
Which these guys, the whole Kagan family has ties to Brookings as well.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's a really small circle.
Yes.
So as you might guess, 2016 election comes up and Kagan is absolutely anti-Trump. He's a never-Trumper. And he endorses Hillary. Called Trump a Frankenstein monster and compared him to Napoleon.
Well,
so we have the warmonger.
Yeah, he is a Frankenstein monster to them. He's going to destroy them.
It's going to end the wars. He writes in the Washington Post, "This is how fascism comes to America." 2018, he writes, "Unless you are willing to punish Saudi Arabia for the assassination of Jamal Khashoggi, then they own you." Trying to get Trump to punish Saudi Arabia for the assassination of Khashoggi. Now, what do we know about Khashoggi?
Where do you want me to start?
Let's start with his uncle.
His
start with and who you think. Yeah, his uncle. Go ahead.
His uncle was the most notorious arms trafficker in the world. He's involved in BCCI. He was involved in Nugent Hand. He was involved in every large weapons supply network to supply Operation Gladio militants in all of these different countries. His name is on everything. And Jamal was told to everybody in the world that he was a journalist. Well, if you go back and you check his connections, he was a intelligence operator disguised as a journalist, which we now know, thanks to our investigation of the CIA, they love doing that. They loved using quote unquote journalists, just like they loved using death squads who changed their name to and claimed to be a political party throughout Latin America. And if you attacked anybody in the death squad network, you were attacking democracy because they registered themselves as a political party. And they learned to do that out of the political warfare cadre academy in Taiwan. They taught every one of these people how to pose as a political party while you're actually assassins. And the CIA has used journalists, the title journalist, in order to deploy spies everywhere in order to gain the upper hand. And that's what Jamal Khashoggi was.
Who do you think killed him?
Honestly, I think it was Saudi Arabia, and legitimately so, because he was tied directly to the attempted assassination of MBS in Las Vegas. And he was killed on the exact same day 1 year later. That was the retribution for their attempted assassination of MBS in Las Vegas the day of the massacre in Las Vegas. That was all disguised as an operation to cover the attempted assassination of MBS.
Yeah, I'll buy that. That theory is pretty plausible.
1 year exactly.
Yeah, speaking of those anniversary dates, we were just talking about the New World Order and how these guys knew about 9/11 before it happened. 10 years ago to the day, on September 11th, 1991, George Bush made that famous New World Order speech. 10 years to the day.
Yep.
That is no coinkydink. All right, finishing up with Kagan. He's been a regular columnist for a lot of big periodicals. Washington Post, New York Times, the CFR's Foreign Affairs. He writes for them. He's written for the Wall Street Journal and something called Commentary. Writes for World Affairs, and he writes for Policy Review. So he gets around. And this is a guy pushing for war in every corner of the world. He was Biden's advisor on Ukraine in 2022. Got that one wrong, didn't he?
Not for the people who he actually works for. I have to keep reminding you that we are in a war that made all of the defense contractors extremely rich.
Yes, it is. My favorite part about Kagan recently, he resigns from the Washington Post in 2024 when they decided not to endorse a presidential candidate. He was so mad that they didn't endorse Kamala. He resigned, which tells you where his priorities are.
It's probably the only principle he's had in his entire life.
Well, I think we should finish up with the goddess of death herself, Victoria Nuland.
And I can't even imagine these two people lived together.
Can you imagine the dinner conversations?
No. Who are we going to kill next? What country are we going to leave a whole bunch of dead bodies in using our military and special forces? Who are we going to send them to kill next?
And she's got the ear of all the Democrat neolibs. And Kagan's got the ear of all the, establishment, never Trumper neocons.
It just shows you it is literally two wings of the same bird.
Yeah, it really is. All right, so Vicky, or Toria, as she likes to be called, is born in 1961 as Victoria Noodleman. Yes, she was from a Jewish and Christian family. Mother was Christian, father was Noodleman. Changed their name to Newland when they got here. She graduates from the Choate Rosemary Hall. And we've talked about Choate Rosemary Hall. She's at 1979, because that's one of those 8 schools association and 10 schools associations, just like all these other private high schools we've talked about.
Yep.
She went to one of them. And so we should probably talk about the school real quick. Founded in 1890 in Wallington, Connecticut, to serve as a breeding ground for the wealthy so they can go be masters of the universe. Famous alumni, a lot of actors and actresses, some big ones. Jamie Lee Curtis, Michael Douglas, Paul Giamatti, all went to the school. Talk about the CIA Hollywood connection there, because there's like 4 or 5 other known actors and actresses that came from this one high school. That's a lot.
And she, since Ghost is not here, I'm going to act on his behalf. Her family originated from what was the former Soviet Union.
Yes.
He would definitely make that point.
Yes. Other alumni of the Choate Rosemary Hall. Amanda Hearst, the heiress from William Randolph Hearst. John F. Kennedy himself went there. JFK. So did Joseph Kennedy Jr. How about Adlai Stevenson, 2-time presidential candidate? And the last name that jumped off that page that went to school there was none other than Ivanka Trump.
Well, that's interesting.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Victoria Nuland gets her Bachelor's of Arts from Brown University in 1983. She studied Russian literature, poli-sci, and history. So she speaks Russian, French, and some Chinese. And so the point you made about her family being from inside the Soviet Union, yeah, that matters.
Yes.
She joins the State Department, Foreign Service in 1984. She served in China in 1985-86. What year was Tiananmen Square?
Right around that same time.
Hmm.
And if you don't know, that's a false flag too, by the way.
Yeah. That was a Soros operations. That's why George Soros is banned from China. All the open societies, foundations, Soros is banned.
Yeah.
They're banned from China. Victoria would help establish the first U.S. embassy in Mongolia in 1988. And here's where it gets fun. From 1990 to 1993, she worked on the Soviet desk at the U.S. Embassy in Moscow. What in God's name is going on in Russia in 1990 to 93? Let's lay it out there.
So obviously, the Berlin Wall falls. There's this mad rush with SOFRA and the Hermitage Fund and Broward and all of those people that are running into the former Soviet Union to buy up all of the industries that were being privatized. And you had the representative that Browder was using, Magnitsky, who once the Russians find out what he's doing and helping being done, which is raping and pillaging their country on behalf of the West, he gets killed. He's a Russian citizen. They kill him. And Browder comes back to the United States with their plan thwarted to scarf up all of these industries. And he convinces I don't think it takes a lot because they're all lying anyway. And they pass the Magnitsky Act that basically began this long-term sanctioning of Russia, making it even harder for them to create a viable economy. And it was all a lie. They were trying to do what they do to every destabilized country and scarf up all of the resources. Well, it got thwarted, and it got thwarted in large part to Putin and people acting with him to shut this thing down. And weirdly enough, SOFRA ends up burning alive in his house a little bit later. And there was retribution for what they were trying to do. And the Magnitsky Act, the entire premise of it was a lie.
Yeah, I was following that story in real time and drew the same conclusion right when it passed. You could tell the people that were pushing for it.
Yes.
It was the same old neocons and neolibs. All right. And Victoria Nuland's right there at the heart of this from 1993 when this whole thing's being said. Everywhere this woman goes, death follows.
Yes.
That's why I call her Miss Angel of Death or whatever you want to call it. Okay. In 93 to 96, she becomes the chief of staff to the Deputy Secretary of State, Strobe Talbot. How many times has Talbot shown up in these shows?
A lot.
Mm-hmm. 1997, she becomes the deputy director for former Soviet Union affairs. Places like Ukraine, which was considered the most corrupt country in the Northern Hemisphere. Okay. So 2003 to 2005, she's the deputy national security advisor to Vice President War Pig Dick Cheney. And Victoria would exercise a very influential role during the Iraq War. Giving all kinds of good advice, Vicky. 2005 to 2008, Obama promotes her to become the U.S. ambassador. Bush appoints her to be the U.S. ambassador to NATO.
Yeah, and what happens in NATO? Isn't that NATO secret armies, the headquarters of Operation Gladio?
Uh-huh.
I'm sure that's just a coincidence.
Yeah, just a coincidence. And what she did there, she was really concentrating on mobilizing European support for the NATO intervention in Afghanistan, which, again, is not what they told you it was.
It's all about the opium.
Yeah. So she served under both Clinton and Bush so far, running the same foreign policy, because that's no difference. And then Obama gets in, and of course she works for that administration. Don't tell me there's not a uniparty. Under Obama, she was the special envoy for conventional armed forces in Europe. She then becomes the State Department spokesperson. In 2013, she becomes the Assistant Secretary of State for European and Eurasian Affairs, and that brings us to the Ukraine and the Maidan Uprising, because she is right at the heart of that. So 2013, she's working for something called U.S. Ukraine Foundation. Well, she's talking to them. She said the U.S. had invested over $5 billion on democratic skills and institutions, civic participation, and good governance since 1991. She's talking about the U.S. investment, but do you like those buzzwords?
Yeah.
Democratic, yeah, civic participation.
Which is jack boots on the ground to cause an uprising.
That's what the Maidan Revolution was.
Yep.
She said that there were preconditions for Ukraine to achieve its EU aspirations. She was trying to give them a roadmap to the EU. She was openly backing the anti-Yanukovych protesters. Openly. U.S. State Department.
And keep in mind, you already mentioned her contacts in Russia. She knows, because the entire family is involved in neocon business. She knows that Ukraine is the red line for Russia. So she's giving the Ukraine the roadmap to basically instigate what happened in 2022.
Yeah, the war started in 2014, and she was right at the heart of it.
Yes.
You remember that speech at the Council of Foreign Relations when Biden talked about the $1 billion loan?
Mm-hmm.
That $1 billion loan guarantee was orchestrated by Victoria Nuland. She was the U.S. point person for Ukraine's what they call the Revolution of Dignity, yes, which was anything but. She's the leading supporter for the defensive weapon delivery to the Ukraine.
The defensive.
Uh-huh. Which they use to attack their own citizens for the next 8 years.
Yes.
She pushed the Europeans to take a harder line on Russian expansionism. So she is the one leading the charge of the Russia.
And where did Russia expand into? Did I miss that?
Well, Crimea, but that was more of a defensive move.
Yeah, they didn't actually expand there. The Crimea, they had a referendum, and Crimea used to be part of Russia. So, yeah. I mean, so again, you just have to say this. The United States has destabilized, I mean, they've couped over 90 governments since World War II, okay? So the expansionism has not been by Russia. But we've got to counter Russians in expansionism because they take an island off their coast that is the home of their navy.
And we've only expanded 13 countries towards Russia to join NATO since 1990. And she has been basically working for the State Department that entire time. So you want to talk about NATO expansion? She is one of the pilots. Yes. Okay. She noted 2014 Russian intervention that shattered any remaining illusions. This is her quote. About this Kremlin's willingness to abide by international law or live by the rules of the institutions that Russia joined at the end of the Cold War. So the Maidan Revolution that she caused, she's saying because Russia actually kept their Black Sea territory and annexed Crimea, that they were the ones breaking all the rules, even though the U.S. has been encroaching NATO on the Russian, for 20 years. That's Victoria Nuland. Nice legacy. So Trump gets elected and she does not stick around. She leaves the State Department in January of 2017. But she stayed in the public eye quite a bit. She would describe the exodus of career foreign service officials that produced dysfunctions at the State Department. Yeah, they were all basically traitors. They didn't want to follow the new chief of, the new
commander-in-chief.
Yeah, thank you. She also had a famous quote where she stated that the American judiciary and media were under assault. Interesting, they thought she combined the judiciary and the media because it's all part of the same apparatus. She decries the trend toward American isolationism. And isn't her brother-in-law the one who was writing about how we've never been isolationists?
Yeah.
She says, this is a quote, "The role of American diplomats and political leaders is to work concurrently with the military to bring to bear all of the political tools we have." So they consider the military a political tool.
And why the other part of the family has infiltrated all of the mechanisms in order to craft the military strategy, having never served themselves.
She would, under Trump, she did testify in 2020 that she had raised concerns regarding Hunter Biden's position at Burisma. And that'll come, we're going to close with that thought, but we'll come back to that. So Biden gets selected. And she goes back to government, and she becomes an Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs under Blinken. What does the Secretary of State for Political Affairs do? That's just the public arm of the CIA.
Correct.
Okay. She had to get Senate confirmation by the Senate to get that position as Undersecretary of State. Even with a track record like hers, she was unanimously confirmed. Not one Republican voted against her. Think about that.
Two wings of the same bird.
Mm-hmm. In 2021, she meets with a Belarusian opposition leader. I'm going to try to say this. Tsikhanouskaya. Close enough. This guy's in Belarus, he gets like 8% of the population of the popular support. And we've got one of our basically our assistant secretary of state is meeting with a guy that's going to try to run a color revolution in Belarus. That's exactly what she's doing.
Correct.
In 2022, she expressed concern that Russia would get control of Ukraine's biological research facilities. She's the one that confirmed that we're doing biological research in the Ukraine. Why are we doing biological research in the Ukraine? Because we can't do it here. It's illegal. The other question is, why is she concerned that Russia would get a hold of them? Could they be used as a weapon? If so, why are we creating biological weapons?
Correct.
Yeah. It's a big deal. So Nord Stream blows. Nord Stream pipeline. And here's her quote. "I am, and I think the administration is, very gratified to know that Nord Stream 2 is now a hunk of metal at the bottom of the sea."
Thanks to
German
them.
media. Yeah, the German media to this day claims that she had advance notice, which I'd be really surprised if she didn't.
Yeah, I would argue that she was part of the planning process.
Yeah, without a doubt, she had a seat at that table. And of course, Germany is, they've been so foolish by trying to move to all these green energies, and now without the natural gas, the energy prices are skyrocketing. Germany's economy's had 3 straight years of recession. I mean, they are not doing well. Businesses are shutting down left and right. The German economy is really got hit hard by Nord Stream. 2024, Victoria advocates for congressional approval of $95 billion aid package to Ukraine. And what she said publicly is, we have to remember that the bulk of this money is going right back into the U.S. to make those weapons. Military industrial complex.
And that's what I have said all along.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny that we get to that point at the end because these people actually work for them. They don't work for us. They are funded and supported by the military industrial complex, the oligarchs at large, and they have succeeded up to the point where Trump came in to basically try to shut down their pipeline of this perpetual money wheel. They create the problem. The military industrial complex and the oligarchs all get rich off of dead bodies in some foreign country that are both American and from that country.
Yeah. There's been a lot of war profiteers in this series we've been doing, but I think this illustrates it more clearly than we ever have. It really is just one big racket.
Yeah, and this is just from one family.
Russia has banned her from ever entering their territory. They call her a threat to security. Why not? I mean, every place she goes, death follows.
Yes.
Okay. Tucker Carlson calls her the architect of American imperialism. Let that one sink home.
He's not wrong.
Foreign Policy in 2023 writes, Victoria Nuland is either America's toughest Russia hawk or a reckless provocateur, depending on who you ask. I'd say she's both. So what's she doing now that Trump's back in? Well, she gets a job as a senior fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School.
Of course she does.
Yeah. Where she focuses on Ukraine strategy, NATO expansion, and the great power competition.
Yeah.
She's a Council of Foreign Relations member and contributor, advocates for continuing U.S. support for Ukraine, wrote in Foreign Affairs, the CFR's periodical, that she urged long-term Western commitment to Ukraine, warning against fatigue. Still beating those drums, Vicky, are you?
She definitely is.
At the Brookings Institute, she gave a speech where she said the fight for Ukraine's freedom is a fight for the free world. Walking away now would be a historic mistake. So you want to know why we don't have peace in Ukraine? Why people like Lindsey Graham go over there and give them the idea that it might be a good idea to bomb some Russian long-range bombers? And the colonel just disappeared on us. Hope she gets back momentarily. Victoria Nuland. Quite the war pig. Trying to figure out what year was she married to Robert Kagan. No, it doesn't say what year they got married. They do have 2 children. All right, well, I've just got a couple more points to make on her. And if the colonel's not going to make it back, then we'll give it a wrap. I don't know what happened to her. The last point about her is right now the House GOP is still demanding records on her communications about Burisma and Hunter Biden. Apparently, I think it's James Comer, thinks that there is some meat underneath those bones. And if they can get those communications, it'll shed an awful lot of light into what the Bidens were doing in Ukraine. So they've issued a subpoena. We'll see what happens. Well, that's the end of the episode called War Pigs. And I'm sorry the colonel did not make it back in time. She just texted me. Her browser and computer just crashed. So I am going to give this a wrap. And you guys all have a great day. And we will see y'all soon.
Okay, I don't know what happened. My entire computer just crashed. Sorry about that, guys. I know Brady just said he wrapped it up. Thanks for tuning in. I appreciate it. We will be back next week with another edition of this. Thank you all for being here. Take care.